I decided to walk through the forest in the middle of the night to collect some water and build a small aquatic ecosystem inside a glass jar. I left it undisturbed for 2 months with no idea what might be happening inside, and when I checked on it again, I couldn't believe what I found. Creatures that looked like they belonged to another world, behaving in ways I simply couldn't understand. But to understand how it all started, we have to go back to the very first day. In the middle of the night, I decided to venture into the forest to collect some water. The darkness made me much more alert, watching every step I took and carefully checking where I was walking. Even though I was completely alone, there was something that bothered me. This place is often visited by people who come to hang out and end up leaving trash behind in the middle of nature. I hadn't brought anything with me, just an empty jar and my phone. And if I could have, I would have stayed right there and cleaned up the entire area. I found all kinds of creatures swimming across the surface of the water, and when I shined my light on them, instead of swimming away, they seemed drawn to it, while others noticed me and quickly disappeared into the darkness below. Finally, I collected some water from the area I could reach, along with a few leaves, soil, and small twigs from the bottom, everything I needed to bring back a small sample of that place and begin my experiment. When I got back home, I poured everything into a larger glass jar where I would begin my observations. I mixed the water with the leaves, soil, and small twigs I had collected, with no idea what would eventually appear inside. The water was completely cloudy, and I could barely see anything, so I sealed the jar and put it away, waiting to see what would happen over time. 2 months later, when I had almost forgotten about the jar, I checked it again and something was wrong. The water had turned very dark, there was very little oxygen, and the bacteria seemed to be taking over. I didn't have much time to waste. But then I noticed something incredible. Despite these conditions, there was still life inside, and most of it was concentrated near the surface. I even found a tiny water mite, a parasite so small that it was extremely difficult to see. It was probably searching for something to parasitize. Although there was still some oxygen left in the jar, dozens of tiny creatures had gathered around the air bubbles, hiding among them and turning them into their refuge. Among all those tiny creatures, I spotted a mosquito larva. They can survive in water with very little oxygen because they breathe directly from the surface through a siphon. And the strangest part is that at this stage, they look nothing like the mosquito we know. Then something with a much more primitive appearance appeared, an ostracot, a tiny crustacean distantly related to crabs. And the strangest part was that there was only one completely alone inside the jar. These usually live in groups, unlike this other creature which may look like a tiny worm but is actually a turbularian. It feeds on small organisms and bits of organic matter, and it has a remarkable ability. It can regenerate parts of its own body. And then while I was watching a tiny snail, something appeared and caught my attention. It moved much faster and seemed genuinely angry, especially in the way it reacted whenever other creatures came near, as if it didn't want any of them getting into its space. It was the larva of what would eventually become a diving beetle, an aquatic predator that spends this stage of its life completely underwater. Its jaws are particularly fascinating because rather than chewing its prey like a conventional animal, it pierces them and injects digestive enzymes that begin breaking them down from the inside, allowing the larva to absorb the liquefied tissues afterward. It also has to reach the surface to breathe, but it doesn't do so through its mouth. Instead, it uses the tip of its abdomen to take in air and store it before diving back down. It can detect the movement of other creatures in the water and lunge at them with considerable speed, even at the larval stage. And as it grows, it will shed its skin several times, becoming larger with each molt until the time comes to leave this form behind and transform into an adult diving beetle. Most of the activity and life inside the jar were concentrated near the surface, while the bottom held strange shapes, the remains of creatures that had become trapped and almost mummified in the sediment. I also found another flatworm moving across the glass with no apparent direction, searching through the tiny particles that had collected there. And then, just as I was filming it, something suddenly appeared and caught my attention once again. It had fangs and legs, something we haven't seen anywhere else in this video. Creatures with legs. At first glance, it already looked much more developed than the others. and its eyes allowed it to detect movement around it with remarkable precision. The most unsettling part was knowing that it wasn't an adult, but a dragonfly nymph that had only recently hatched. Even so, it was already showing distinctly predatory behavior, staying on the lookout and ready to strike whenever a small creature came too close. What was most remarkable was that, despite still being in one of the earliest stages of its life, it already had all these characteristics that made it a predator perfectly adapted to this tiny aquatic world. During this stage, a dragonfly nymph can spend most of its life underwater, and some species remain there for several years before becoming adult dragonflies. What's fascinating is the way it breathes, almost like something from another world, using internal gills inside a chamber in its abdomen and moving water through them to extract oxygen. But there's more, because it can also use that same flow of water as a propulsion system, forcefully expelling it to move quickly when it needs to escape or change position. It usually stays hidden among sediment, leaves, or vegetation, remaining completely still and waiting for something to come within reach. Even the way it attacks is remarkable. Its lower jaw stays folded beneath its head and can shoot forward in a fraction of a second to grab its prey. And when you realize that all of this belongs to a creature that doesn't even have wings yet, this tiny nymph becomes even more incredible. But if you want to know something even more fascinating about them, there's a detail that completely changes the way we understand how they hunt underwater. For a long time, it was thought that they relied mainly on vision. But recent studies have shown that dragonfly nymphs also use mechanoreceptors to detect the vibrations and movements produced by other creatures in the water, something that becomes especially useful in dark environments or when visibility is extremely poor. They can even detect chemical signals left behind by potential prey, meaning they don't always need to see another creature directly to know that something is nearby. And there's something even more surprising. Their mask isn't simply an extendable jaw, it also contains sensory structures that help them locate and capture prey with remarkable precision. All of this happens while the nymph remains hidden underwater, using a sensory system that is completely different from the one used by the adult dragonfly. Pay attention to its reaction speed because it's probably one of the most impressive things about this creature. When it detects movement nearby, it doesn't need to chase its target, it simply reacts within a fraction of a second. Its nervous system is built to process that movement and respond almost immediately, which is especially important for a predator living in an environment where an opportunity may last only an instant.